Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, the President and Chief Executive Officer of Ubiquity University, and I am delighted this morning, California time, where I am now, to greet you. It's Mother's Day here, and so I want to greet in particular all the mothers on this call and all the women generally as a special warm welcome to this day. My mother passed actually in May 14th, 2014 at the age of 95. And I love my mother very, very dearly. So on Mother's Day, I consecrate a little part of my heart to my mother. And it's worth just noting, you know, that the Buddha said that the only people in the world that were naturally enlightened were mothers. He says there's something about motherhood that activates a depth of compassion and empathy that only mothers know. It's a very interesting observation from someone like the Buddha who knew what enlightenment was. So I just want to thank all the mothers on this call. We're waiting for Apila to come through to give us our invocation. She just got to Maui after 30 hours flying the globe from Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia. So she was going to be a little bit late this morning. But I want to welcome you to this call. It's a Chartres community call, and every month we come together to talk about all things Chartres. This morning we're going to be commemorating the fire at Notre Dame, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. But I see Apila is on the line. Apila, welcome from Kyrgyzstan, and happy Mother's Day. And I'll turn now the gavel over to you for our invocation.
Given the state of the world right now, probably we need a gavel in our prayers, if only to bring us to our own consciousness. So this morning, I light this candle for Notre Dame, the good flame, the good fire. I light this candle for the mothers of the world. And I burn this sage from France, cedar actually, to purify the air, to purify our minds and hearts as we come together in this important way. Creator, I ask for blessings on our Chartres community. You have given us each other. You've given us a clear mind and strong hearts. Help us to unify, to move as a whole, to make the changes that are possible for us to make, those of us standing close to the source, to you. We may not be militarily mighty. We may not be financially powerful, but we are powerful in that we are close to the forces of nature. So our small efforts aligned with nature and all of Mother Nature's forces, the passion of Notre Dame, the generative capacity, the life-affirming teachings from the Mother, show us a light and a path forward. With these calls, with our trips to Chartres, we unite, we unify, and through that, make the changes needed to save this planet and life itself. Ah, Mama.
Thank you, Apila. Apila will be giving us a report from Kyrgyzstan later in our hour together. But we want to start this morning by just deepening our awareness of the great fire that destroyed the roof and much of the building at Notre Dame. Almost probably everybody on this call has been to Paris and been to Notre Dame. It's considered one of the great masterpieces and cultural heritage sites in the world. It personifies the feminine, the great mother. It's Notre Dame, Our Lady of Paris. It symbolizes France in a very powerful way. It's one of the great Gothic architectural masterpieces built well over 1,000 years ago. And for those of us who go there every year to France, to Chartres, which was the current cathedral was built almost at the same time as the cathedral in Notre Dame, and walk the labyrinth and go down into the crypt and admire and are blessed by the extraordinary light that's refracted through the stained glass windows. The passage of Notre Dame and the extraordinary fire and watching the great spire collapse onto the roof in flames, for me, was really traumatic. And I was just there last year with our group with Andrew and Georgie Szabo and others that traversed, had a walking tour of Paris. We spent an entire afternoon in Notre Dame. Several of us walked around the cathedral at night. And I first went there when I was only 8 years old. And I've been going to Notre Dame continuously for 60 years. And so my heart hurt, and my heart still hurts at the flames that engulfed that extraordinary cathedral. So we thought, as we approach our own pilgrimage to Chartres between July 7th and 13th, to delve into the mysteries of Astronomica, the seventh and final liberal art, that it would be good to just spend some time contemplating the mother on Mother's Day, and the mother in flames, the Black Madonna in flames, and everything that means, both positively and negatively, both as warning and as blessing. So we asked some of the faculty that were going to be there in Chartres to just share some of the thoughts and reflections. So we're going to start with Anne Baring, and then we'll move to Carolyn Mace and Apila. And then we'll be hearing from a special person today who is joining our proceedings and our faculty in Chartres right at the last minute, Lynn Bell, who lives in Paris. And she'll summarize the various comments. She was in Paris when the fire was burning. And then we'll open it up to any questions, comments anyone wants to make on the call. And then Apila will give us our final benediction for the day. So Anne, welcome, and please share your thoughts on Notre Dame.
Okay, well, I first heard that this was happening and rushed to the television. And as I watched the flames grow ever higher and the spire collapse into them with that terrible crash, I wondered whether I was watching a prophecy of what might happen to the planet, a cleansing, as it were, as we reach the end of an astrological era and the beginning of a new one. But also as I watched the incredible courage of the firemen entering the towers to protect them and prevent the great bells within them from crashing to the ground, I wondered whether these men represented those people on the planet who might be able to act in such a way as to prevent such a total catastrophe taking place. The cathedral had been neglected for centuries, ever since the Revolution, when the goddess of reason had briefly been enthroned in that sacred space. It looked as if this neglect had inadvertently led to the terrible fire devouring the roof. The near destruction of this primary symbol of the feminine archetype seemed to point to the end of the Christian era. But at the same time, it evoked such enormous grief, regret, and love in the millions who were watching the flames devour the roof. It aroused a huge and heartfelt response in them, really a surge of the heart within them, that all might not be lost, and the hope that the structure could be restored to its former beauty and magnificence. Shortly after watching this catastrophe, I remembered a book that's been in my library since its publication in 1971, and that I'd read long ago. It's called Le Mystère des Cathédrales, written by a modern master alchemist called Fulcanelli. And he says in that book that for 700 years, the great Gothic cathedrals have offered European man a course of instruction in his own possible evolution. The cathedrals of Notre Dame and Chartres, Amiens and Bourges were spiritual schools where the secrets of the soul and the spirit were nurtured and transmitted through the paintings, sculptures, magnificent rose windows, and the sacred geometry which informed their construction. The cathedrals themselves are images of the eternal womb of the Great Mother, or Holy Spirit, the feminine aspect of the Godhead, symbolized by their great internal space, their womb that holds so many mysteries. He says that the Cathedral of Notre Dame is an alchemical temple. The whole cathedral is a silent witness to the ancient Hermetic science of alchemy. The main entrance porch holds many round medallions illustrating the great work of alchemy. And even if these have been eroded by time and the destructive hand of man, so that their form is worn and their colors faded because they were once painted, the architect of Notre Dame, whose name was Guillaume de Paris, ensured that they were also encoded in the panes of the sublime rose window above the portal. I didn't know this. It was absolutely fascinating. Notre Dame even holds the sculpture of an alchemist hidden among a row of gargoyles. He wears the Phrygian cap of the adept and is reflectively stroking his beard and gazing out at the magnificent image of the great work before his eyes. Perhaps he was the architect, perhaps he was Guillaume de Paris. Relating this to our visit to Chartres, perhaps we should hold in our hearts the presence of the incredibly evolved men who built these cathedrals, who designed and built them, who had access to a Hermetic knowledge now lost to us, and who are open to the presence and guidance of the divine. So that's really all I have to say. But I was deeply, deeply moved, as Jim was, and I was crying as I saw those flames devouring the roof so quickly and without any hope, I thought, of saving it. But those firemen were incredible. Their courage was unbelievable. And I mean, their tiny little forms going up into the towers, that was one of the most moving things. So I'll pass on to somebody else now.
Well, thank you. And that's a powerful image for us to hold today. The world is burning, and we're the little firemen and the firewomen that are somehow trying to deal with the engulfing flames. And that's a daunting inspiration. And the deeper point that you're bringing to our attention is that consciously embedded in the stone, in the sculptures, in the stained glass window, are those truths that can assist us in our possible evolution as spiritual beings. In that sense, Notre Dame, like Chartres, they're books that can be read by even the illiterate to gain the kind of insight that leads to spiritual development. So, Anne, thank you very much for that. Carolyn?
I'm so taken by that. Anne, hi. I can't wait to meet you in person. I mean, that was magnificent. Magnificent. Thank you. Hello, everybody. You know, a couple of years ago, I think Jim knows this, certainly Benafshe does, I had a dream, and in the dream, I was standing outside Chartres, and I saw an airplane. An airplane is a very significant symbol for me. And this plane came down, and I always have a dream of a plane before or in the early stages of my beginning a book. The plane came down and it clipped off the roof of Chartres, and it took down the two bell towers, and I stood there screaming and screaming, and then the one side of it, the side facing the Serpent, completely collapsed, then the roof collapsed, and then the entire cathedral collapsed as I saw the plane burning in a field. And I started screaming, and I screamed so much it woke me up. And I called in the morning, I called my spiritual director, who is a Jungian analyst and a theologian. And I said, what happened? What is this? I was so upset. I actually couldn't function. And I said in a prayer, what are you telling me? What are you telling me? I had a dream the next night. And then I was presented with a question. The question was, what's missing? What didn't happen? And I said, what didn't happen? And then the question was put again, yeah, what didn't happen? And I was so still discombobulated from the sight of this cathedral being destroyed, something incomprehensible to me, that I couldn't answer the question. And so in my frustration in this dialogue, I screamed, you have to tell me, because I can't, I'm past comprehending. And I was told no one died. No one died. And then the dialogue ended. So now I'm going to shift to Notre Dame. And the roof burned. And just like I saw the roof of this, I called my spiritual director after that fire, and I said, what is the connection between that dream and this fire? What I'll begin with is that cathedrals, like mosques, like synagogues, are the buildings that are built, I believe, through divine guidance, I certainly believe that of the medieval cathedrals. I'm not sure about contemporary churches so much as I am by these grand buildings that were literally built by people with faith and of faith. Unlike people who get a construction team together today and they put up a building. These aren't buildings. These are living, breathing centers that were designed to receive grace and transmit grace, and to speak with grace to people who came to be near God. These are edifices, holy edifices, that were built with such divine intention so that heaven would come and reside on the earth with and for human beings who deeply believed that heaven was with them. In every stone and in every window. And they walked in, no one walked in there who was not a believer. No one would dare walk in who did not deeply believe their soul was significant to them. It was an era when earth was a silent, holy place, and the veil between heaven and earth was very thin. But as the centuries passed, that veil, that became a wall, and now it's a barrier. And that barrier was put up because it is a barrier that's created out of a sense that maybe that place, that off-planet place, that place of the invisible world doesn't exist. Well, maybe it does, but maybe it doesn't. For the first time in the history of humanity, a goodly part of the population is wondering whether or not there is a God. And if there is, maybe we can have God on our own terms, on our own terms. That is pretty spectacular. That is pretty spectacular. Maybe that there is the first time there is a sense that we are not part of nature, we are observers of nature. And as being observers, we are no longer subject to the laws of nature, but in fact can tamper with those laws. That is how incredibly narcissistic we have become about our place in the universe. In the meantime, what is happening in the archetypal world is there's a collision of the gods in this particular time in which the Abrahamic religions are being shaken to their roots because the image of the half God, half man, the Messiah myth, the Jesus myth, and the holy prophet is no longer able to sustain the population. So it's diminished to fundamentalism, and on the other hand, to those who cannot relate to the modern high-tech intellect, who can't relate to the mythologies at all, as we stand on the brink of entering a cosmic era where earth-centric religions hold us together anymore. So we're in this extraordinary time of transition to a galactic cosmology. So in a sense, I wonder, what is the symbolic meaning of the burning of a cathedral that holds so much symbology for those who read symbology? For the cathedral that is seen as the one that protects France, the home of the Madonna. And do I think there is symbology in that, as France is erupting in so many revolutions of sort? In this critical moment of transitioning all over archetypally and spiritually and in the sacred. And I think, yes, this is a grand transition where the blanket of grace that is created through a mutuality of prayers said by human beings, matched by grace transmitted through heaven, is very thin. It's very thin. And human beings think it is an option to pray, that it is an option to take our shoes off on sacred ground, to bow our heads as we go into the sacred, to intellectualize about whether or not there is good or evil, right or wrong, that we can decide these things that are eternal and have always been. It's not an option. We cannot rewrite the structure of the universe because we have what we think is very sophisticated technology. I think we are living at a time when heaven is revealing a very different, when we are through our bio-spiritual blood and bones have reached a point in our evolution where perhaps we are ready to understand the nature of God as law, that we have to transcend some of our mythologies as an anthropomorphic God, which we can no longer sustain, and that the mystical fiber of our religions has to emerge so that we develop a bio-spiritual ecological theology that in which our bio-spiritual nature, the feminine, the masculine, the whole of nature blends into a bio-spiritual ecological soul, where we get that we are one with nature and our nature functions on the laws of the universe, the mystical laws of our soul, the organic laws of nature, and that these are the same laws that were used to structure these cathedrals, that they are organic statements of mystical, sacred architecture, and that that architecture, in fact, is one somehow or other with our own body, that sacred architecture is indeed the structure of our bioarchitecture, and that is going to be the theology that ultimately survives, is the mystical content of all of these faiths as we make the transition. We won't live to see this, but we are living to see the dismantling of the religious part of these traditions so that their mystical jewels can unite and form, I believe, a bio-spiritual ecology, theology. And from that, I think new roofs, shall we say, will be put on.
Thank you, Carolyn. That's a beautiful notion of a new roof that is beyond sectarianism and houses all human beings that come in with an attitude of humility and reverence. And I love this notion too of that builds on what Anne was saying, that architecture, that book of the cathedrals, is the book in our own psychophysiology, our own chakras.
Yes.
And that's one reason why the cathedrals have such an effect, is because they call us up to that which we most truly are.
We are actually walking into our soul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're actually walking into what our soul looks like. If you could paint your soul in stained glass windows, that's your soul talking to you, which is why it's breathtaking.
Yeah.
It's breathtaking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful notion. Thank you so much. Apila, if you're there, I'd love to hear your comments on Notre Dame, and I would love if you would work in a little bit about what you've just witnessed in Kyrgyzstan, because that's all part of
Yes.
the world.
Yes. Thank you for the chance to speak on this, Jim. You may know that Kyrgyzstan is a very tiny country at the foothill. Well, it's an extension of the Himalayas, the land itself. And it's a diaspora point for humanity. And the Kyrgyz people hold a tradition and know the oral history of the time when we were of people in the Northern Hemisphere of one, they say one fire, one language, one culture, one spiritual belief. And about 30 to 40,000 years ago, there was a sacred fire ceremony, Uluwat. And after that ceremony, people went in different directions. This is Kyrgyz oral history. Some to become Siberian, some Japanese. And the majority of people that went west were of the snow leopard clan and became European tribal people. the Kyrgyz people have charged me with the responsibility of helping people to remember, those of us in the Western world, that we are related to Kyrgyz people and we should come home and join them in the sacred fire of renewal. You might recall that in France and in other places, that the sacred fire was used to burn women spiritual practitioners to death. It's time we reclaim the sacredness of fire. And the burning of Notre Dame echoes the anguished cries of the people who were sacrificed in those fires. In my visit to Kyrgyzstan recently, I've been working there for 13 years. The purpose of the visit was to ignite the woman's fire. The first fires that we did were male fires, or male overseen fires, although women were a part of it. But it's taken many years to get women to come forward and to feel that it was time. There are many, many, many traditional spiritual women practitioners in Kyrgyzstan. But what I wasn't prepared for is the danger that these practitioners are in. Many of the practitioners are Sufi as well as indigenous, because one of their chiefs a few hundred years ago converted to Islam, and many of his people did as well. But Sufism and indigenous spiritual belief were compatible, and we would say today it was a relaxed Islam. But in the past 5 to 10 years, Pakistan has been building mosques at an incredible rate of speed and introducing an extremely dangerous, violent type of Islam. And the women that I work with there, they're so spiritually adept. Not only can they astral travel, but some of them can even take their bodies with them when they go. These practitioners are willing to share what they know, but it's very hard. One had to travel into town to meet with me and go right back and not participate in anything because she had been taken by mullahs and forced to go through a re-education program and to give up her Tanguism, her indigenous spirituality, and she's policed all the time by them. Other women we would meet in a yurt for a ceremony, but it had to be late at night so no one would know that we were doing it. The destabilizing of Pakistan in this country and the displacement of indigenous spiritual women is palpable. You can feel the fear, which has never been there before. Basically, Kyrgyzstan is a pro-West democracy. So coming back from that experience and thinking about what Carolyn just said about our soul light and walking into it, the women's fire was so humble, and it's an ancient, ancient fire of making your own candle out of a certain kind of pure cotton that grows there and using ghee to provide some fuel in it. But when the flames, when these candles are burned, the flames dance and move and reveal every kind of color. And of course, if you have the ability, you can read the messages that come through the flames. So what I would say today is that we remember the Kyrgyz women, that we remember our powers as women and the sacred power of fire. Kyrgyz women, as I said, have asked me to invite you to come. And I'm going to talk with Jim to see if we can organize some ways that might happen. It's time that Western women, in addition to the religious traditions we might follow, that we regained our indigenous spiritual powers of clairvoyance, of healing, of ceremonies. And this source, Kyrgyzstan, one of the homes to us all, has opened the invitation to us. Let's renew that sacred fire. Thank you.
Pila, beautiful. You know, it may be a Pila that we can do something in Chartres when we get there, and in our opening ceremony, ignite the sacred fire somehow connected with Kyrgyzstan and the Kyrgyz shaman women, and take counsel together as to how we can keep the flame alive, and maybe put together a pilgrimage.
Jim, can you hear me?
Yeah.
The healers there showed me how to make this traditional umai fire, and I could get maybe I can get some of the faculty members to make these candles with me, and we could ignite that fire. It just can be in that small basin.
Beautiful. Let's do it.
Okay, you're on.
That's why we go to Chartres, everyone. It's about the fire. It's about our souls. It's about, you know, as Plato said, what Carolyn said is that he says the purpose of the mystical, the purpose of the sacred, because it is us, is that when you come into these geometric forms, it literally almost magnetizes your soul upwards to become that which you truly are. And that's why for Plato, learning is not an acquisition of knowledge, it's a remembering of your original identity embedded in the cells, the geometry of your body. And so as you look at the geometry of the stained glass window and the 12 around the one in the Chartres Great Mother window or the Christ window, it's magnetizing, ionizing your own geometric forms of your soul. It's a beautiful thing, and to think of burning the fire this year in solidarity with the Kyrgyz, from whence we came, is a very, very powerful thought. So thank you for that, Apila. Thank you very, very much. Now we'll turn to Lynn Bell. Perfect. Hi, Lynn.
That was like a supersonic ride to another dimension. So first, I want to say that it's very moving to listen to everyone and these incredibly rich layers of insight and powerful experience. I've lived in Paris for a long time, and one of the things I love doing more than anything in the world is taking a first-time visitor and walking them across the islands to visit Notre Dame. And I did this in March with a friend of mine from Belgrade who'd never been in Paris before. And she was, of course, raised a communist, so absolutely not religious. And as we walked into the cathedral, she went, she gasped. She just took in the grandeur, exactly what all of you are saying, of what this space creates. And despite the fact that millions of people were going in there, most of whom were not praying, the cathedral maintained its, and the people who tended to it maintained its spiritual presence at the heart of the city. Now, part of that presence is beauty. I never go along the river. I never ride a bicycle up to the river and come across Notre Dame without having my heart lift or my soul rise to her beauty. And that beauty is both physical and spiritual, physical and divine. And people feel it, even if they don't name it. They feel it. They want a piece of it. They take pictures of it or selfies of it, but they don't understand the whole of it. None of us do. And I don't know if you saw in terms of what Carolyn was saying, but in the New York Times, one of the plans that architects have proposed for Notre Dame is to build a rooftop garden on top of her that will somehow grow food that will be given to the poor and have space for the bees that survived the fire. There were beehives on top of the cathedral. And a lot of people said, what happened to the bees? Which tells us about the fragility on so many levels. Now, Notre Dame, as Anne said, after the revolution was kind of beat up. You know, lots of things were chopped and smashed and cut off the cathedral. And in the middle of the 19th century, Viollet-le-Duc and another architect brought it to life, all those gargoyles. The cathedral we know actually is a reinvention. And at the very center of the cathedral, the center pillar outside is a ladder, which is said to represent alchemy as well. And the ladder has 7 steps for each of the 7 liberal arts. And it's a woman with her robe open, and the ladder goes up here. So I spoke to Carolyn the other day and about, you know, what does this mean? And one of the things I was struck by was that, well, when I drove down, first I saw the smoke. My neighbor sent me a text, and I was actually on Skype with a client, and I said, oh my God, Notre Dame's on fire. And I had to get up, and I saw this great plume of smoke from my balcony. And I was having dinner from a friend from out of town whose phone wasn't working, so I had to go to the dinner. And I was thinking of Notre Dame the whole time. And so at the end, I rode down there, and the last glower of the fire was coming through the stones, and people were just standing there silent. It was beyond the point where they were gasping and saying, oh no. And we couldn't get very close. In fact, the cathedral is still quite cordoned off. That you can't actually get right up to it for the moment, in any case. And the next morning I rode by, and it's like she'd lost her crown, right? The queen had lost her crown. And at the same time, if you think of it, the cathedral for about 8 or 9 days was open to the heavens, open to the stars. She suddenly had a direct connection with what's above, as Carolyn was calling, and all that enclosure, all that coding, all that holding of the spiritual in not divine laws, but in the church's laws, okay, is sort of burnt open. And as Carolyn said, there's an incredible possibility. But I think that for us, it means us coming together in Chartres becomes even more important, even more powerful, because we are tending and honoring the divine feminine in Chartres. Chartres is Notre Dame, Our Lady of Chartres. And so as we do that, we will be tending the divine feminine. And it's so important for us to come together and remember what she is built for, to know that she has changed. I had a message from a friend who's a stonemason in the States who used to live in Findhorn, and he restores historic buildings. And he said he was working on a project, and all the masons wanted to go to Chartres to help restore the cathedral, just to offer their work, which is how things were done in the medieval period. That's what people did. They said, I will go, I will do it. So we, in a way, will be holding this energy that we know that exists in other places, but that's fragile. There have been, in 2018, 800 churches had some form of vandalism in France. And the energy, the spiritual impulse is weakened. And as Carolyn says, I think it's calling for a transformation and for a connection to something that is more powerful, that will light us, that will touch us and bring us into the new age, which is coming. And that Rick is going to be talking to us through the brilliant work he did on the Saturn-Pluto cycle. And because we're in a period right now of where a lot of things are being lost to the world, whether it's on a personal or a collective level, and we see it in many, many dimensions, it's important to know that this is part of the birth pains of what we are called to create together. And if we are able to do it, if we are able to bring in or to hold what we know of the real divine impulse, then we can maybe keep too much from being lost. So.
Thank you, Lynn.
You're welcome.
It must have been quite extraordinary to look out your balcony and see the smoke coming from Notre Dame Cathedral. That must have been just viscerally highly impactful.
Well, and the size of the cloud within 10 minutes was so big. But even then, and I mentioned I brought this friend from Serbia, and she's one of the first people who texted me. She's like, Notre Dame is on fire. You know, they're going to, this can't happen. You know, this one visit, and she she couldn't believe what was happening. And we, I don't know if you know, but they've put now netting. For me, it was painful. It was literally palpable. I really felt as though my heart was knifed open by the fire. There was this searing kind of feeling of like I've lost something that I love incredibly deeply. And I realized how much she is at the center. I don't know many cities in the world that have a spiritual building at the heart of the city, that everything turns around. Yeah. And so, yeah, I felt it like a personal loss, but more than a personal loss, both personal and collective. And also standing there with other people, silently watching as she continued to burn, even though the fire was under control. And we knew, you know, there was a danger that the bell towers would go down, but they didn't. So, yeah, it was really powerful. Really, really moving, and still is. And as I hear you talk about it, I go back into the powerful emotions of that moment.
Yeah.
Mm.
And just as just a reminder for everyone, just this last week, we invited Lynn to join our faculty. Some of you will remember Lynn from a few years ago. And she's an astrologer, a good friend of Rick Tarnas's. So Lynn, we're delighted you're coming, and look forward to your star reports every morning.
Yes.
And having a good time.
Yeah. Well, it's wonderful. You're very dear to me, and Chartres is incredibly. It's a spiritual home, as it is for so many of you who are listening. And I know that it will be very powerful to be back with you all.
Good. So we thought, I just noticed that Andres Barblan was on the call today, and he's a Frenchman living in Switzerland, deeply immersed in the history and culture of Europe generally, and France, his homeland. So I thought it would be appropriate to have Andres give us a few words of his perception of the fire of Notre Dame. And then I'll say a few words in summary, and then we'll wish everyone a good day. But Andres, why don't you share your reflections on the burning of Notre Dame?
Do you hear me?
Yes, we don't have video, but we have your voice.
Okay. So I felt also very sorry for what was happening, but at the same time, I felt, well, it's exactly what happened in the Middle Ages. You have to remember that Chartres, the building you see today, is the 6th building built in Chartres. And that in the 12th century, Chartres burned twice. And that the building you see now is the result of the clearing, partly, of the fire after 1194. And as Lynn was saying, the cathedral in Paris was also, I had also all kinds of problems too. And as she said, Viollet-le-Duc worked on to rebuild the church as it is known today. And in Chartres, the roof of the present cathedral has burnt in the 19th century. And what you see today as a roof of the cathedral is something which has been built in the 19th century, and where they have used now in the 19th century already beams of steel and so on, because they didn't want to, they wanted to consolidate the whole thing. So in a way, we have not to look at these buildings as if they were done once forever. They are like people. They grow old, they change, they move, etc. And they can be repaired, transformed. And we have to see that in this continuity. And for me, fires were the normal life in most European cities in the Middle Ages, because everything was built in wood. That the only way to warm was to have fire in the houses and open fire. So very often the fire turned the houses down. So this it's very good to to react as 21st century people, but you should also remember that the stonemason, the people who had building these places, knew perfectly well that it was dangerous, that all kinds of things could happen, and the priests who were giving a mandate to build the places, well, they knew that too. So I don't want to go on this, but simply for me, what was fantastic, or what is fantastic, is after all, most of the structure is still there. And there are not many buildings of today that after 800 years, when they are submitted to that type of event, would survive. The stones are still there. The vaulting, most of the vaulting is still there. So we should be thankful for the mastery of the builders who managed to create such a fantastic place. And we should not wait for 2024, like Macron is saying, because the church will not be rebuilt by that time, because it's impossible. And the place has to dry, there are all kinds of things which have to be done. And then crazy people are suggesting all kinds of crazy ideas. But for me, the cathedral has to be rebuilt roughly in the same shape as it is now, or it was at the beginning of this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Andres. That's beautiful context for our heartfelt discussion, that fires happen, life happens, and there's always the opportunity, Lynn, as you were pointing out, to rebuild and in a reconsecrated way. So thank you for that. By the way, Andres we're trying to get permission from the diocese in Chartres to let Andres lead our cathedral tour this year, just because he's so deeply immersed in the history and architecture of Chartres. There's some bureaucratic issues. They like their own official people doing it. We're trying to suggest that Andres do it. So we'll see how it all turns out. But Andres has been with us in Chartres for many, many years. I want to close. Kate Genevieve is one of our pilgrims in Chartres for many, many years as well. And she wanted to say something about a water ceremony that was happening in London during the fire. So Kate, just take a couple of minutes and share that, and that'll be our final image before we close the call.
Okay, thank you so much, Jim. Yeah, I just want to tell you about the alchemical convergence of the beginning of the Extinction Rebellions, which were happening in London, which happened on the same day as Notre Dame. And they began with hundreds of people gathering at Tower Hill and walking the road, the Royal Road of Sovereignty, down past St. Paul's Cathedral to Westminster Abbey. And this is incredibly unusual for London, which has been pretty ambivalent about the climate situation for years. And as the news hit that Notre Dame was burning, hundreds and hundreds of people were in an old church, which was also built in the 12th century, called St. Dunstan's in central London, filling it up with song for the mother. And this church itself was, it's a ruin because it was bombed out in one of the wars, and all the trees and spring flowers grow through all the arches of the ruins. So there was just the most mystical, spiritual beginning of this protest, which swept through London for a whole week during Holy Week. And it was the most unusual protest because it was not only incredibly well organized, but it was deeply caring. And the spirit of solidarity that existed on the streets of London, with people doing meditations down loudspeakers, people offering Kabbalistic prayers and doing Islamic call to prayer. It was just such an extraordinary week that this went on at the same time as the fires engulfed Notre Dame, this celebration of the water, and all these people coming together and activating themselves to actually stand up and achieve something, which England has now announced climate emergency, which was one of the terms of this protest. So I'm totally startled, and my heart is so full by thinking back to that time and the reality of hundreds and hundreds of people coming together in hope that something can be done to protect this earth, and the simultaneous burning of these spires which connect heaven and earth in Notre Dame. Something so extraordinarily powerful about it, and so opening. Who knew that London could get its act together like this? And I think it gives hope for the planet.
Thank you, Kate. And thank you, Anne, for the depth of your scholarship and deep insight. Carolyn, for your notion that the cathedral mirrors our soul. Apila, for your notion that that the fire, we've got to keep the fire alive as a reconsecration of that which was at the beginning. And Lynn, your personal reflections about the being right there, standing in silence. And Andres, your reminder that fires are part of life and it's an opportunity to rebuild. And then Kate, your beautiful, beautiful image of the fire ceremony in St. Dunstan's, which I visited from time to time. And the fact that out of that whole amalgamation, one country is now acknowledging that we're in a climate emergency. So that's these are beautiful images. These are beautiful nuances on a very complex, mystical truth. And I think in closing for me, as a result of the fire and the Extinction Rebellion and knowing we're going into Chartres, my heart feels more vulnerable to that which is precious. Not only in our souls, but that which is precious as human beings have expressed as best they can in a finite way, that which is infinite, but is burning in their hearts for that expression. And that's Notre Dame. That's Chartres. And that's each and every one of us. And the fragility of who we are, the fragility of the masterpieces that we fashion, the opportunity to make pilgrimage to the Queen of the Cathedrals in July, and descend into the crypt and walk the labyrinth and share the depths of what it means to be alive at this precious moment in human history is why we go to Chartres every year. This is why it's the Sanctum Sanctorum. And I really want to thank all the participants today. This has been a sacred hour. And the fact that we could consecrate Notre Dame and Chartres in this way makes my heart very tender and full of gratitude for each and every one of you. So thank you all. We'll meet again next month. That'll be our final session before we gather in Chartres. Blessings on Mother's Day, blessings on the Mother, blessings on Notre Dame, and we'll see you all next month. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.